Sometimes a sequel can be just as good as the original, sometimes even better. Sometimes a sequel is bad and ruins the legacy of the first, and sometimes a sequel is so bad that everyone collectively agrees that it does not exist. That's Pacific Rim 2. You see, bringing up the existence of Pacific Rim Uprising to a fan of the first movie is often met with confusion, surprise, bewilderment. This is a Lake Laogai situation where a second movie just never happened. Sure would have been cool if a sequel did happen, too bad it didn't, and in my opinion that's certainly the best approach to view this movie from. In fact, I originally wasn't going to make this its own video. I was going to tack it onto Pacific Rim 1 to not break the running gag, but it was going to be like a 50-minute video, and I had other things to do.
Oh no!
But even though I'm talking about Pacific Rim 2, that doesn't mean that it technically existed. Just think of this video like I'm making fun of a piece of fanfiction, because that's essentially what this is. This is just fanfiction. Studio-run, corporate fanfiction. Del Toro and Beecham didn't return for this, and instead, entirely new creative heads came in at studio request. People may say this film was a mistake, or an abomination, but I couldn't disagree more. When you think about it, Uprising is actually the perfect sequel, because it shows just how easily it could have been for the original to fuck this premise up. You can watch it with the mindset that it isn't actually canon, and in fact is just a theoretical movie about what they would have done if the original was as soulless and shameless as possible. Or you can just not watch it at all. That's also a good option. Now, a sequel to Pacific Rim isn't the worst idea in the world, nor was it impossible. Sure, those aliens were nuked at the end of the last movie, but if I know one thing about Xeno scum, it's that there's probably more. Don't think they're gonna let that one go. A sequel could have worked, but it didn't. It didn't at all. So what went wrong? Well, let's start off with... Our new protagonist is Jake Pentecost, the son of Idris Elba's Major Pentecost, played by John Rian Johnson will pay for what he did, Boyega. Apparently Pentecost had a son this entire time, kinda strange he never mentioned him once. Years prior, Boyega had a falling out with his dad. He was a promising pilot in training, but tried to pilot a Jaeger by himself for some reason, and it almost melted his brain. Why did he do that? Is he stupid? Because of this dumb act, Elba kicked him out of school. Oops. What a way to write off his absence in the original. His dad was just ashamed of him. Damn.
He doesn't talk about me much.
Betrayed by the country he loves, Jake the dog turns to a life of crime, becoming a wealthy criminal by scrapping Jaeger parts and selling them on the black market. You know, it isn't that bad of an idea. The son of the no-nonsense major being a punk. That's interesting. They don't do anything with it, but it's interesting. Boyega's backstory is really only utilized for the first 15 minutes of the movie. His life of debauchery catches up with him after a deal goes wrong, and then the rest of the movie happens. Like, we never get this aspect of him ever again. He just becomes another generic protagonist.
This is our time. This is our chance to make a difference.
The movie has to move on to all the other fascinating characters of Pacific Rim 2, like Girl, Scott Eastwood, Chinese CEO, random-ass kids.
No! Come on, Renata, not the face!
Sorry, man.
Remember how the world had to come together to develop and maintain the Jaeger program? How the Jaegers were so expensive that the program was scrapped altogether? Yeah, this girl built one in her garage. I get technology is expensive at first and then trickles down to the public later on, but this girl is building a mech out of assorted Jaeger parts in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. It takes forever just to build a custom car in a suburban garage. Imagine building a robot by yourself as a teenager. The movie excuses this by saying it's a smaller robot, so that makes it more logical. Yet this little guy can roll and do stuff I've never seen another mech do before. Despite this girl building her own little robot, she just becomes another pilot. It's like if in Top Gun, Goose could just design his own superplane. but they just make him fly them instead. Speaking of Top Gun, Jaeger School. To avoid a life sentence at Guantanamo Bay, Boyega is forced to become the new instructor for the next generation of Jaeger pilots. What better teacher than the guy who was kicked out of Jaeger School all those years ago? It's like if the new teacher had actually gone to the same high school years before, but he was that kid that fell asleep at the wheel and crashed into a wall. Speaking of falling asleep, Scott Eastwood.
You have to understand your enemy. Yeah.
There was a time Hollywood tried to make Scott Eastwood a thing, but he's always just there. He's not bad, he's just not really anything else. And he's the co-lead of this movie, so that's our stellar main cast. Sure, there's others, like the Chinese CEO, and Charlie Day, and the random assortment of forgettable children, but we'll get to those. Oh boy, we'll get to those.
He is not strong enough! None of you are strong enough!
Tone is important. Tone is the atmosphere, the energy of the film, or to put it simply, what do you feel while watching it? And that tone is why so many can just write off this as a fake sequel. It's just off. This is mainly thanks to a whole different directing style, an inherent lack of Del Toro charm, which is my way of saying, the original looked kinda weird and cheesy, but I liked it. There was a strangeness to the world. A majority of the film was either in darkness or at night. It had Ron Perlman. Pacific Rim 2 looked at everything the original did and threw it out the window. Now every fight is during the day, the brightest day imaginable. Remove any semblance of these being large machines. Have those Jaegers do jumps, flips, whatever the hell this is. Who cares about any sense of weight? Just destroy the illusion these mechs are controlled by people. Remove the anticipation between punches, along with those vital pauses in the movement. Now they just look like giants in power armor, instead of 100-foot tall robots. Just because the action is faster now, it doesn't make it more impressive. If anything, it does the opposite. Any punch or swing feels less impactful. But hey, the movie does have a solution for that. The classic way to show any moment as important. Slow motion, and Dutch angles, and licensed music. It really is just not the same. Oh wow, it's already this long into the video, and I haven't even talked about what happens in it. Silly me. Silly me. 10 years after the kaiju attacks, humanity is still rebuilding. Jake Pentecost, though, is living the high life, thanks to his life of crime, just like me. His time of debauchery catches up with him, though, after a deal goes wrong, and along with a teenage girl named Amara, they both get coerced by the feds to join the Jaeger program. You might be wondering why the Jaeger program still even exists. Well, humanity has just continued to prepare for something, just in case. Which means none of these Jaegers or their pilots actually have experience fighting a kaiju. I think the only one with real experience left is Mako, and Raleigh too, but he's not in the movie. That's fine, don't worry about it, because all these pilots are going to be replaced with drones. Chinese drones, by a private Chinese company. Before this can get approved though, the city of Sydney is attacked by a rogue evil Jaeger. Yeah, there are bad Jaegers now, just roll with it. But who's controlling them? And why? We don't know. All that's certain is that the Chinese giant robot drones are the future, and in no way can backfire at all. Luckily, Mako is there to continue to vote against the robot drones. She dies in a fucking helicopter crash. Yeah, Mako, the driving character of the last movie, has like 3 scenes in the whole movie, and then dies in a chopper crash. Lovely. Can't believe they assassinated a character like that. You know, killed her off in such a way. Not an actual character assassination. Nah, that's reserved for Charlie Day. The main antagonist.
I'm ending the world.
Charlie Day is evil.
Get up from that, you pile of junk!
You might agree with that assessment that this was a character assassination, ruining a pivotal character like Dr. Newt Geisler. And that previous segment might have made you think I also think it was a character assassination. But no, it was just for a bit. I couldn't think of a better segue. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be honest. I wouldn't call Charlie Day being evil some character-ruining decision. It's not implemented really well, at all.
He is not strong enough! None of you are strong enough!
Now hear me out. This guy was always obsessed with kaijus.
He's a kaiju groupie.
Shut up, Herman. I don't them.
Remember that brain drifting he did all those years ago? Well, he didn't exactly stop.
You read my mind.
Is he fucking that brain? Is Charlie Day fucking that monster brain? Just like with years of social media use, his mind has become corrupted beyond belief. Charlie Day isn't actually evil now. He's basically possessed. They confirmed that behind the scenes. He's kind of like the girl in The Exorcist.
Bye!
It's still handled pretty terribly. The biggest problem with Uprising is that for half of the movie, we just don't know what the plot even is. There are no stakes here. The consequences of this world were decided in the last movie. Eventually we learn about Charlie's grand plan. For years he's been rising up the ranks of the Shao Corporation, coming up with the idea of drone Jaegers. Thousands of drone Jaegers. And he successfully was able to implant all of these Jaegers with kaiju brains. That evil Jaeger was just a kaiju brain. Kaiju brains control Jaegers now. So Charlie Day betrays the rest of humanity, unleashing his horde of half-kaiju Jaegers on the Shatterdome and the world. Now, somehow by combining their laser powers, the robots are able to open dozens of new rifts across the Pacific. Honestly, when watching this, I thought, my god, like that's insane. How the hell are they gonna get out of this? Like, just one rift almost ended the world last time. Dozens of kaiju coming in simultaneously, and the Jaeger bases destroyed? Not to mention now there are half kaiju Jaegers running around the place. The stakes are actually kind of high now. These corrupted giant robots look kinda neat. Alright, movie. I'm on board. Why not? They're gonna have to fight this army of monster Jaegers. Awesome. Then they just shut down the Jaegers.
Yes!
That's it. Took them about 10 minutes. The lady CEO of the Shao Corporation hits an off switch, and the army of Jaegers just aren't a threat anymore. All this build-up for these monster robots, and then it's resolved. They had to just reboot their computers. In the end, only 3 kaiju get through the rift and head towards Tokyo. You see, the precursors have an ultimate plan: to blow up Mount Fuji. As blowing up Mount Fuji will activate the whole Pacific Ring of Fire, causing every volcano to explode, terraforming the world. First off, precursors? That's what people call the aliens now? I swear, I'm not trying to relate everything back to Halo, it just keeps happening to me. Why the name precursors? That name implies something that came before, like a past tense, which is why they were the name of the alien race before the Forerunners. What exactly are these aliens the precursor of? They and humans exist at the same time. They're actively fighting one another. What does this name even mean? Second, why didn't they just blow up Mount Fuji in the first place? 2 decades ago, with even the first kaiju. They had like 10 years to keep sending monsters at it, but decided to just attack all over the Pacific instead. The entire lore is just fundamentally broken now. Yeah, so it was all set up to have this final fight in Tokyo. Our surviving team of child soldiers rocket their way to Japan to confront the kaiju. In the 2010s, Hollywood really tried to tap into that Chinese market, and like some taps tend to do, it blew up in their face. What does it mean for a movie to be pro-China? It can be simply depicting the Chinese like your average Michael Bay movie portrays the military. It can be making a movie relatable to the mainland Chinese audience. Or it can be even filming next to a concentration camp. Thanks, Disney. And in 2016, the Dailan Wanda Group bought Legendary Pictures for $3.5 billion. With that, there were some changes to be had, even to existing projects like Pacific Rim 2. I'm not going to complain about China having a more prominent role in the sequel. Pacific Rim only got a sequel because it was so successful in China. These movies are set in the Pacific. It makes sense that in the sequel, the Chinese would be more than just background characters. Now that said, the characters in Uprising, they're, well, let's get back to evil Charlie Day.
I'm ending the world.
So Charlie Day's the head scientist of Shao Industries, right? The leading figure that pushes the drone program. He is, if anything, subservient to the CEO and founder of Shao, Li Wen Shao. Li Wen is cold and stern.
Sorry. She doesn't do the whole handshaking thing.
Charlie is afraid of her, basically, for the whole movie. It's pretty obvious they're 100% behind the evil Jaeger attack. They probably even killed Mako to stop the vote from going through. This is built up for half of the movie. And then Charlie Day turns evil. Li Wen Shao employed and trusted Charlie. She gave him free reign to create these drones. And yeah, while she was betrayed by Charlie, they're still responsible for this occurring in some way, right? Imagine an arrogant corporation getting its comeuppance by flying too close to the sun. Like Shao creates these drones and then the drones betray them. Typically, the movie would reflect on that. Show how their arrogance was kind of a bad thing. Yeah, that isn't what happens.
Most systems are online. Sending help.
Instead, after Charlie's betrayal, Li Wen Shao immediately solves the drone problem. She and her corporation distance themselves from Charlie, and then they become the protagonists. She becomes a protagonist. She becomes a fucking Jaeger pilot. I'm not saying Li Wen should have been blamed or punished for Charlie going rogue, but at least recognize the accidental contribution in some way. Maybe a character could have called Shao out for not being more alert about what Charlie was doing. Maybe Shao feels an immense amount of guilt for being bamboozled. Instead, we get nothing. Shao Industries is both an incredibly powerful corporation, and also not at fault for the actions of Charlie. It seems like the movie expects the audience to just move forward, and if anything, cheer for Li Wen as she helps save the day.
Li Wen! Are you reading this?
That's one of my automated factories. It was Newt.
Pacific Rim 2 isn't just pandering to a market that liked the original. This is the only film I've ever seen where the all-powerful business is the protagonist. It's like the Wanda Group really did just purchase Legendary and rewrote the script to include a Chinese company that saves the world. Imagine if instead of the boys writing Vought as the soulless corporation that they were, Amazon forced the writers to make Vought the real heroes all along, and an equivalent of Jeff Bezos descends down to kick Homelander in the nuts. Or if Zuckerberg produced the Social Network, and the lesson of the movie is that Andrew Garfield was stupid and dumb. So now I guess the question we all have is who? Who the hell is responsible for this? As easy as it is to just blame studio interference or the director, the answer isn't that simple. There isn't a lot of information available, but the best insight I got was from one interview, in a video that, as of this recording, has less than 2,000 views. Thanks to the channel Filmmaking and Fandom Station, by the way. So let's go back to the first movie. It's a major hit. The studio wants a sequel, Del Toro wants a sequel, and he's entirely on board, wanted to direct and everything, but delays kept happening. Legendary was bought out by the Wanda Group, and this led to an internal shakeup which delays the project even further. A few years of delay, actually. And by now, Del Toro had already moved on to another project. Something about boning a fish. I don't know if you've heard of it. So Del Toro just kind of pushed Pacific Rim back to the studio, with a few suggestions and ideas of course, but he's not in charge of anything at this point. The studio can do whatever they want, and they wanted to bring in someone new, someone who could both write and direct, a full creative vision for the new sequel, and in my opinion, someone who wasn't influential enough to push back on any decisions the studio wanted to make. So what the hell happened then? First, Del Toro's lack of involvement. The studio going ahead without his vision really should have killed this project from the start. That doesn't mean Del Toro contributed absolutely nothing. He actually did. There were a few ideas Del Toro had for an initial sequel that went into this movie. For one, Charlie being evil. Yeah, people's biggest complaint with this movie. That was something Del Toro discussed with Charlie for a sequel idea.
I'm just not feeling totally myself these days.
In the first draft of the movie, Raleigh was supposed to come back. Mako was supposed to die, and this scene would have been Raleigh failing to save Mako rather than John Boyega. Now, I'm just gonna say it, Mako dying like this is still stupid. She doesn't go out in a Jaeger, but as a passenger in a chopper. Like, what the hell? DeKnight hints that maybe Mako isn't dead permanently. Like, he kind of does a hint, nudge. I'm gonna interpret that as Mako coming back to life through some alien kaiju hijinks. So cool. Script is written up, everything's good to go. Well, Charlie Dunham has a schedule issue, so they have to rewrite another script with a different lead. They have a few ideas pitched around and none of them are going anywhere. So Del Toro comes in, and he has the idea for Idris Elba to have a son. John Boyega's character was a Del Toro creation, which even the director thought was strange because nobody mentioned this guy before. But that's why they wrote this elaborate backstory of them having a falling out. So John Boyega's character was just their best attempt at resolving a schedule dispute. DeKnight mentioned how a lot of the issues that he saw with the movie just came down to budget. He wanted Mako to have a lot more presence in the film, but in the end she only got a few scenes. He kept bringing up how he was kind of powerless despite being the director, while also not blaming the studio at the same time. And in my opinion, this just sounds like a small director who doesn't want to lose any future job opportunities. It's really hard to say where his vision ends and the studios begin. As much as we can talk about studio interference in China, sometimes a creative vision just isn't great. I can't imagine the studio told him to change everything about Pacific Rim. How the Jaegers fundamentally fight, having the camera move around like this, slow motion, and Dutch angles. So many Dutch angles. According to DeKnight, Del Toro told him to not make a Del Toro Pacific Rim, but to make his own. Which, while that is an incredibly nice thing to say, I kind of wish he didn't say it, because after he did, DeKnight went off to the races. DeKnight did end up differentiating Pacific Rim 2 from the original, by just removing everything that people liked about the original. I guess it really is just a shame that Del Toro was never able to make the Pacific Rim sequel he wanted. Who knows? Pacific Rim could have went on to be a successful franchise. I mean, of course, assuming that a Del Toro sequel would have been good. Which, I mean, come on. Of course it would have. Right? You know, when I was researching this, I came across this quote that Del Toro said like 3 years ago. It was his original idea for the sequel, which I'm just gonna read out verbatim. The villain was this tech guy that had invented basically sort of the internet 2.0, and then they realized that all his patents came to him one morning. And so little by little they started putting together this, and they said, oh, he got them from the precursors, the guys that control the kaiju. And then we found out that the precursors are us, thousands of years in the future. Del Toro went on to explain, they're trying to terraform, trying to re-harvest the Earth to survive. Wow, and that we were in exo-biosuits that looked alien, but they were not. We were inside, and it was a really interesting paradox. Had Del Toro made Pacific Rim 2, the aliens were going to be revealed to be future humans the entire time. Humans sent the kaiju. You know, sometimes things just aren't meant to have sequels. Why the fuck was it called Uprising?